buyers are collectively blank staring us when we get rate drops because it's expensive to buy homes right now comparatively over the last, while they've been in the market.
The income, from 2010 to 2024 went up by over 100%, 104% increase from.
Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Jeff, my virtual plant and I are very happy to be here with you yet again. Let's talk some real estate.
Well, you're taking good care of that thing in the background, Mark. It hasn't died yet, which is more than I could say for my live one in the background that doesn't seem to get watered enough. But yeah, fun to be back. I do have a bone to pick with you, though. You don't know I'm going to do this. You're already smarter than me. You've taken the only look that I have, which is a baby face, clean-shaven look, and you're rocking that better than me, too. So you haven't left me a whole lot left to work with, man.
I covered my face for 4 or 5 years here, Jeff, and I was scared to release it, but here we are. So I'm trying this on for a little bit. I don't know how long it will last. I'm not sure if the wife is a fan or not.
Well, I didn't know if you were just mocking me or not in my inability to grow one that's respectable. So I just don't. But yeah, sometimes it's more about keeping the wife happy than. I don't have to look at my own face very often, except for doing this, unfortunately.
Speaking of which, Jeff, you just got back from Quebec, I think.
Yeah, we went on a short little trip up there, and it was a lot of fun. We hit Quebec and Montreal both. We drove between the two one day, and I'd never been. Fun to see. We are not French speakers, so it was interesting being in an area where like the predominant language is not your native language, and most of the people spoke English well enough to figure out how to take money from you and stuff. But it was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was cool. My wife and I celebrated 20 years together, which is a feat, probably more impressive for her than for me. But we have 4 kids, and I joke with people that we have 4 and she has 5, and it's not from a different marriage. She just has me as the 5th child to try to keep a hold of. So we had a good time, though, man. It was a lot of fun.
I imagine that is very true, knowing you. So, yeah, well, very good. Well, yeah, congratulations. Happy anniversary to you guys. That's a long time and a lot of good stuff there. So let's dive in. On episode 15, we had a really good conversation. I really enjoyed it. And it was on artificial intelligence. It was with Jim Amarin, who's authored a book, The Generative Shift. And hope you've given it a listen. A kind of high level, zoomed out view of large language models, artificial intelligence, neural nets, where they are, where they may be going, and then zooming in to look at a couple of examples of real estate data and how we can prompt ChatGPT and get some useful answers out of it. And it opened my eyes a bit. So I'm excited about that. I think it's. No matter what, it feels like it is the beginning of a new era, as the internet was for a generation just a little bit older than me. I was kind of around for it, but I think I didn't quite have internet in high school, so it just coming of age as it was coming of age. And then you had the iPhone and the App Store and all these things. And so now we've got this, and I'm aware. So that's exciting, and be able to research some more.
Yeah, there's this unknown aspect of it, and there was, I hear, I wasn't in the stock market during the dot-com bubble, but you hear people talk about all of this enthusiasm about what this new internet economy was going to mean. And certainly the internet didn't go away, but the way that, the winners and losers were not, what people thought they were going to be at the time either. And it's interesting to see artificial intelligence emerging, and you've got big players, you've got those making money in it, as far as providing the kind of the virtual picks and shovels or the hardware to run all of the training sets and the inference, data analysis and stuff. But it's interesting to see how it's evolving. It's early days, like you said. We came up at the same time, and I didn't know what the internet was going to lead to, and you can't even imagine a world that's disconnected today, like it was much more so back then. You and I both had experiences with our fathers, doing appraisal work in kind of an analog, old school way. And I literally remember watching the fax machine, and orders would come over on the fax machine, and that was the new technology of the day, and it was it's just interesting how that stuff has evolved as we've become more connected and can transfer and transmit more data in a shorter amount of time, and now analyze and synthesize that data in a shorter period of time with this evolution that artificial intelligence is bringing. And it's fun to see where it's going to go for sure.
Yeah, this podcast is an interesting exercise in kind of forced and involuntary, I guess, all at the same time, research and getting prepared. And I'm really looking forward to further deep dives in artificial intelligence and exploring that with the viewers and you and the plant as we sort of make our way through that. But one thing is pretty clear to me that while artificial intelligence is going to replace some industries or fields pretty quickly, for us in real estate and for most, it's just going to be a powerful tool, right? Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. In fact, I was telling you a little bit beforehand. I was listening to an interview. You and I have a couple of podcasts that we like, and it just, I think, gives good insight in technology and thought leaders and certainly kind of power users of technology. The one I'm thinking of was really interesting along those lines. So Bill Gurley and Brad Gertschner have a podcast, BG2 they call it. They're Silicon Valley venture capitalist types. Have been kind of in the public space a little bit, but with the latest episode, or one of the most recent ones they dropped, they were interviewing the CEO of NVIDIA, who's NVIDIA in terms of the company has been out there in the public space for recently, because they're providing the GPUs that turn out to be the better, or the kind of the optimal way to run and power artificial intelligence. And I heard several things about Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA. He's been there for a really long time. Just how impressive he is. Maybe not an Elon Musk type in terms of personality, but just somebody who really is kind of a go-getter and running very successfully now a company. One of the questions that really struck me that Brad asked Jensen was, so what role do you see AI playing in your company, in NVIDIA, going forward? And Jensen, immediately went to, well, I'm right now, NVIDIA is a company of 32,000 employees. I see us growing headcount in the future to maybe 50,000 employees, but augmented by like 100 million AI bots was, for spread among those 50,000 employees was kind of the math that he was using. He wasn't saying that's where they're at today, but that's where he sees the future of AI implemented or integrated into their company and their firm with what they're doing. And I think it all leads to this discussion, and along the lines that we had with Jim, of it's productivity gains. It's taking the people that you have and probably a need, for incrementally more. I think the way Jensen described it was, hey, our headcount will probably grow on a linear basis, but our productivity per employee is going to grow on an exponential basis, because each individual will have way more capacity as a result of leveraging the AI. And I just thought it was interesting to hear him describe how he saw it going. I don't know what the future holds, but I expect that it will be something similar in the real estate space, generally, Mark. It was a fascinating listen to hear his perspective on, the impact that can have in a company.
Jeff, it's not a dissimilar path without artificial intelligence that you and I have been on over the last half decade with our company, is trying to get appraisers' eyes and judgment on more loans than is traditional or typical, and trying to make efficient all the pieces around what an appraiser does that aren't specifically appraisal related, so that they can really focus and maximize on what only they can do in the world, and so that is kind of an analog look at it. And you've got the digital revolution of artificial intelligence that is trying to get to the same place or provide the same type of benefits to not just appraisers, but anybody in the real estate space or anybody in any space, quite frankly. I think that's the real trend here, is a tool just like our phone is, and calculator before that, or whatever, just becoming more and more productive here.
Well, that was certainly Jim's perspective, and I appreciated how he laid out some of the reasons for that, the data that you need. You can't effectively train an AI model on a bunch of MLS data that goes out of date very quickly. It's controlled and owned, behind, paywall and membership subscription, access, limitations that way. So I think there are reasons why it's not just going to be a bunch of artificial appraisers. Now, some may argue that neither one of us have implemented artificial intelligence or even organic intelligence with the way that we've gone about trying to be the effective appraiser. But there is this concept in valuation that I think applies to the implementation of artificial intelligence. This concept of the highest and best use of a piece of property, what brings the highest return to the property. Appraisers and those in the real estate space care a lot about that. But I think from any company and any employee or employer's perspective, what really is the highest and best use of an individual's skill set and talents, and how can artificial intelligence take on the things that aren't that highest and best use? In that interview, one of the things Jensen was talking about was we've got way more ideas than we have bandwidth and capacity to probe and test and experiment with and try. But as we leverage the AI to experiment and go further with these ideas we'd like to test, we can become more creative. We can find new solutions to existing problems in ways that would just take us much longer if it's all that analog or that individual powered approach.
Jeff, and it's really interesting. And I one thing that I am seeing that these language models bring is, before I need someone to organize or take advantage of the technology that becomes a tool that I use in the form of software as a service model generally, so I subscribe to something that performs something for me. And I become pretty darn reliant on that, right? It becomes an integral part of my business, whether it's an order management system or in our appraiser world, adjustment support, and on, right? I see Microsoft, I see Salesforce, you're working really hard to implement artificial intelligence on its customers' behalf, on our behalf, so that it's there and we can start using it. And, I see the Salesforce CEO, Mark Benioff, talking a lot about this. It's like, hey, look at all the things you can do now with Salesforce. Keep subscribing, keep going. But it is really interesting because I think these language models make curating or empowering the tool yourself much more accessible than it was before. And I think that's a really interesting kind of blossoming opportunity here for the individual.
Absolutely. And it was really fun to even just get a taste of that with Jim, throwing data into a model and just asking it questions and interrogating it. And then, to your point, Mark, to then, kind of go a next step and say, well, what software systems, what internal systems do I have that maybe I could augment or replace or enhance or whatever? And it just really opens doors. I mean, I hear a number of people talking about, how with leverage of AI, you can have a lot more smaller companies with fewer people, but, still able to produce something, maybe or maybe not on the scale of like a Salesforce, but it definitely empowers you to do a lot more with a lot less, which at the end of the day is what most business is after, in some form or fashion.
You bet. I totally agree. I think the future is bright and just a lot of initial research here to look at. And as these tools get even stronger, one thing that seems to be the case is, you might build a utility off of one of these things and might even think that it's proprietary. And then ChatGPT 4.764 comes out and it does that for you as part of it, and so it's such a fast evolving environment, and it's really difficult to find where your value add time investment is worthwhile. And I think that's all part of the discovery right now.
Boy, it really is. And as you're saying that, I think that the initial version of ChatGPT dropped, wasn't it November of 2022? Or thereabouts. It seems like, we're just coming up on 2 years into this thing, and it's already having such a monumental shift. I'm just speaking to what your point of the pace at which this is changing and evolving. It's fun to see it. It's sure head spinning, to see how quickly it's evolving. And at some point, the limitations are really just the bounded by whatever your level of creativity is with how to implement or put some of these types of tools to use. And the expectation is that we'll just continue to get better at kind of that same pace.
And to the appraisal community out there, a number of folks have reached out after watching episode 15 and saying, man, enjoyed the episode. Boy, we are using it like crazy. Let me tell you a little bit about that. And it's just really cool. I mean, this is in the appraiser spirit to be, playing with these things and helping each other to come along and try and find ways to use this stuff. So it's really great to see. I love it. And I think there's a lot more exploration in front of us.
Absolutely. Like you said, look forward to deep diving, on this topic specifically and seeing what more we can pull out of it and learn about it. And about the time we learn it, it'll evolve with the next, drop of whatever the new model is that, that comes out that week. But exciting times to be. I mean, a little bit intimidating in some ways, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming if you're willing to just get in and play and test and learn.
Yeah, I think Jim's book came out sometime this year. I don't remember what it was, but I think he might have said in a different forum that it's like, man, I hope this thing isn't already out of favor for being topically relevant or current. So he's going to have to make a refresh version, I think.
Well, if he figures out how to leverage AI to do it, maybe the version 2.0 won't be very hard. He can just have it spit it out for him.
Touche.
For sure.
Very good. Well, Jeff, we can kind of switch gears here and talk a little bit about the market and what a human psychological experiment this is. U.S. monetary policy over the last 2 decades. I was tweeting somewhere to someone this week that rates were at 7.4%. Rumors of a rate drop coming in September were out, and Powell's comments kind of made everybody think that was coming. Yep. The market then prices in a drop. So they go from 7.4 to 6.15 on the day that he speaks. He lowers them much further than expected. I think twice the median bet of what was expected. And we are collective buyers meet us with a blank stare at that rate drop. Like, yeah, what else? I'm not doing anything different. And since then, rates have gone up a full 0.5 percentage point, sitting at 6.66, I think. Maybe that's symbolic for us all, but yeah, I think they're sitting around there right now. So they've gone up a full 0.5 percentage point. If buyers were blank staring all of us in the real estate world at 6.15, they certainly are doing it now. So I think I saw mortgage applications were down month over month, 17% from August to September. Just awful numbers. We thought we'd talk a little bit about the buyers, I think, and what their world looks like, what homeowners' worlds look like. A lot of people are reporting softening of the real estate market and housing. I see kind of anecdotal stuff all over the place, whether it's an appraisal I'm involved with, whether it is just a listing agent on social media saying, man, any of you guys having no activity on your listing, and all of these sorts of things. There is a quiet, made even worse by Milton, Hurricane Milton going through Florida, and not just in Florida, right? In a lot of areas. I think that was really disruptive and just a reason for people to sit on the sidelines. Even more so. But all of this in the context, I think a lot of folks are saying, well, what is going to get these darn buyers to do something? And, price drops, material price drops maybe are what has to happen, because it may be true that home affordability is just out of control. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and where we are?
Yeah, you bet. And one of the things that has kind of driven this home for me and has got me thinking along these lines of home affordability in the context of, like, we know what the pricing is, in our local markets or whatever. You've got interest rates that are a factor there. You've got incomes that are a factor there. A little while ago, I was walking through a house, doing an appraisal, and I think that the borrowers, like parents, had met me there or something, but they were just reminiscing about, back in the 80s when we bought our first house, the interest rates were in the teens, and they were just talking about how this 6.5% interest rate is, from recent history and that perspective is not very good, but from longer term history, it's really good. But then I asked him, so what was the price that you paid for that house in the 1980s at the 12 or 14% interest rate? And they're like, I think we paid like $49,000 or $50,000 for that house. And it just got me thinking, along the lines of, it's really interesting that you've got this factor of the overall price point. You've got this factor of the income that you're dealing with. And then what is the interest rate doing? How does it, kind of connect those together? And so as you and I have been thinking through or maybe looking at a little bit of the data out there, I've been really curious to see like how bad is housing affordability in this moment where we know that home prices are a historic high and interest rates, if you look at from 2020 on, are much higher than they were as we went to this zero interest rate policy from the Fed and 2 to 3% mortgage interest rates. So it's been an interesting dive into some of this data and led, frankly, to a conclusion I wasn't fully expecting.
You bet. I think it's a really interesting analysis, and so Jeff, we prepared a few slides here just to take a look at a few markets, and reminder, Jeff and I are not economists by trade on any stretch, and really armchair more than anything. So take all of this with a grain of salt. But we are appraisers and participate in the market and have for more than 2 decades. And I see a lot of desperate predictions of home price drops coming, and we've talked about evidence of that on this episode or on this podcast. I mean, I've seen builder communities with 200, 300, 400 properties listed for sale, many of which have completed construction around the Houston area and pockets all around Houston. The builder incentives, you listen to the earnings calls of the major publicly traded builders, you hear a lot of that. We're trying to find the market, by dropping prices or providing concessions and that sort of thing. And they have the rising inventory of existing homes that they're competing with. So all of that is out there. I guess probably best described as a hedge fund manager, Kathy Wood, that I like to listen to. She's big on disruption and innovative technology, and has not performed very well over the last several years. Is a lot of tech stocks have kind of crashed, but actually ran into her in an elevator. I was starstruck. She has been talking since the interest rate rise started, that it's not so much that it's sitting at 6%, kind of ho-hum, big deal. That's not that much different than it's been on average over the last several decades, multiple decades. It's that it was a 8x or much larger increase over a short period of time. The Fed fund rate going from 0.25 or whatever it was sitting at to 4.5, 7.5, whatever it is now. And that is just a shock to everybody. It's certainly a shock to people that were entering the home buying market for the first time during COVID, right? Because they had experienced 2% rates and prices and property prices at a certain level. And then in a matter of a year and a half, that drastically changed. And it's like, well, no thanks. I'll sit on the sidelines. I don't care what it was in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s. I know what it was 2 years ago when I started looking, and I'm not going to. So I think we've got a little bit of that going. And first, we've got about five slides or data to run through here. But this is from wolfstreet.com, representing home prices, median home prices in MSAs. We've just randomly selected a few across the country, looking at the housing bubble one in the great financial crisis, and looking at the current bubble that we're in. And I think you can generally confirm this is a bubble because prices have come down from 2022, 2023 when it was wild. So Jeff, you want to walk us through a little bit of what we see here?
Yeah, you bet. And, like you say, these are kind of random. We've got 2 on here. Phoenix Metro, which, I saw big swings in Phoenix, Vegas, California in that great financial crisis, swing. And one of the things that caught my attention here, Mark, and the reason I thought was interesting, this particular article and set of graphs is that when you look just at dollar figures, like Phoenix, started on this graph in the 2003 of a median home price of 160,000 or something. It almost doubled, up to about 300,000, and then it reverted back, to that or below, like less than 150,000, just as one example. But this second bubble that it's illustrating is showing it going from a trough of under 150 up to over $450,000, which most of us have lived in the more, in the very recent experience. So the data that we've put together here shows the home price change from the peak of bubble one to the peak, well, not even to the peak, but to the current, today's median pricing of bubble two. And it was really fun and kind of interesting to see how some of these played out. So in Phoenix, for example, the peak pricing from the great financial crisis to today's pricing is up about 50%. The one thing that we then thought was, well, what have home median household incomes done over that same period of time? And so on the top of this graph here, we have the 2010 median household income for the Phoenix MSA was about $35,000. Fast forward from 2010 to 2024, so 14 years later, it's at almost $62,000, which is a 76% increase over the same period of time that housing went up by 50%. So I was not expecting to see this be the case, but the household income went up by more than the home prices in Phoenix. Now that's not the story in every one of these metros that we looked at. So I think it's been kind of fun and insightful to go through, but there's this contextualizing of the data that says, yeah, I know in dollar terms, home pricing is way higher today than it was, a decade and a half ago. But what does that really mean in terms of my buying power today, both as measured by income, and we know kind of what the interest rates are. They've gone up in the last couple of years, like you said, Mark, but if memory serves me correctly, I think they were in the 5, 6, 7 range, probably 5 and 6 during this great financial crisis time, at least leading up till 708. That sound right from your historical
Yeah, I think
memory?
I remember getting a loan in 2005-ish for 5.5, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So slightly better, at that point, but kind of in that ballpark. This next one that we've got here, San Francisco, bubble. California has been known for some boom and bust real estate markets, and this from peak pricing to today's pricing, home prices went up 78%. Big increase. Obviously, they're up over $1 million is the median price in San Francisco now. What really surprised me on this one was that the income, from 2010 to 2024 went up by over 100%, 104% increase from $60,000 to $123,000 or almost $124,000 over that same period of time. And obviously Silicon Valley has, kind of a unique, character and income set and that sort of a thing. But to see median incomes exceed the median home price increase over that period of time, both in San Francisco and in Phoenix, I just wasn't expecting to see that kind of bear out in the data here.
Jeff, and one small correction. I think the obvious thing would have been here to include median income, like household income. That is not what we have here. The easily accessible data was personal income.
That's right.
I think directionally, this is about the same. One difference that I think that can present here is that, do you have a increased instance of two household incomes entering the home buying market, right? And so then there is more income available when you multiply this by 2 or some additional, 100%, whatever it is, when you've got, just instead of 1.05 people or households having dual income, maybe you move to 1.15 house, I don't know. So I'm not saying that clearly, but I think you get my drift. So interesting to think about, and it's notable to me how much, certainly in these two cases, how much the incomes have increased. And I mean, my goodness, it's more than the home price increases from the two peaks. So that's interesting. We've got a couple more to look at here. Jumping to Denver and Salt Lake, a little bit of reverse in that the home price has risen more than the income. But if you start to think about, well, maybe now a few more people have dual income that are buying homes, that easily covers the increase here one way or another. And I think it's also just notable that, a place like Denver, I'm kind of surprised by that being so close to Vegas and Phoenix and all of that, didn't participate in bubble number one, but have certainly participated in the great relocation of COVID and all that. So just notable there, but I think generally directionally support a trend amongst these cities of income drastically increasing while home prices are drastically increasing.
Yeah, and that really was the takeaway, Mark, that surprised me. As I was assuming that incomes on average, we'll see if you trust me with the data ever again. I can't even like talk about the right term or whatever, but that incomes, whether personal or household, have risen this much over this amount of time. And there's just this recency bias, I think, that we all have kind of built into us that, that, yeah, my income, has maybe gone up. It doesn't feel like it's gone up enough, but when you look back, at least with what the data is showing here, I was really surprised to see incomes changing as much as they have. Now, certainly there's an inflation factor. We've had high periods of inflation for several years that kind of wash out a little bit of the buying power with that income. And that also is reflected, I think, in the median home pricing. But, that aside, I was very surprised at how much, at least the data that's, from the federal source that we got was showing, price increases at that stage.
We close out the metro tour around the country of Dallas and Tampa, showing real material increases, largely for Dallas because it didn't participate in the first bubble in the GFC. So, but directionally, all moving in that direction. Of course, this data doesn't take into account home insurance increases, HOAs, and a number of taxes and a number of other factors that are involved in this. But I think it's really interesting to see it. And, as you alluded to here, Jeff, I was, I'm certainly buying into, and I think I still do, but buying into, buyers are collectively blank staring us when we get rate drops because it's expensive to buy homes right now comparatively over the last, while they've been in the market. I was talking to a manager of ours that was saying that they a loan officer that had 27 files that are sitting on the desk not moving because they're waiting for more rate cuts or they're just dead. They don't work out anymore with just this move from 615 to 66. And so I'm sure that's happening to a lot of people out there. So these incremental decisions in the current decisions are very much weighted by the high price and the affordability. But a lot of that is shock. And so, I think shock from deep interest rate rises or steep interest rate rises over the last 2 years, the steep property value increases that we've seen over the last 4 years. But I'm not sure that affordability is overly strained based on these two numbers here, income and price appreciation. So that's kind of how I'm reading it, Jeff. I don't know if you see it the same way.
Yeah, yeah, I do. And what's interesting in all of these six that you've shown here, Mark, is that they pricing all peaked in 2021, 2022. We're not seeing it fall off a cliff. I'm starting to see some articles, kind of confirming what you talked about a minute ago of, builder subdivisions sitting on a bunch of homes, newly built, not moving, in and around the Houston area. I see that inventories are increasing, and that may put some pressure, some downward pressure on the home pricing, but I'm not seeing it fall off a cliff. And you can start to see, in those markets that did have bubble number one, we've got Tampa on the, up right now, and in 2006, 2007, it really falls off a cliff. It drops precipitously, and we've kind of stabilized, from 2021, 2022 pricing. We all wish we had a crystal ball. I mean, I love it when people say, you're an appraiser, you must know what the future holds. Like, what's the real estate market going to do? And it's like, dude, I wish I was as, any good at predicting the future. What I'm not seeing in the data is that same type of a drop off that those markets that did have a bubble, it peaked and it dropped. It's a V shape, and this thing is up and it's bouncing along the top. There may be some, some impetus to cause home pricing to drop. I think it would certainly help address, what affordability issues there are in the moment. But this, as I zoom out a little bit and look at this, the affordability issue, though I think is real, it's not as exaggerated as I thought it would be. And I don't know that we're necessarily going to see this peak and valley as dramatically as we saw in bubble number one. And the other takeaway, Mark, that was interesting is there were some of these markets that there was a bit of a blip, but you look at DFW, for example, and it went from maybe 135, 140 up to 160, back down to 135, 140, but not enough to even be labeled a bubble in this data set. Not all markets, dealt with the same thing in the financial crisis, but almost every market has run up by about the same amount, in recent days, and that was a little bit of an unexpected finding as well.
Jeff, I think as I'm listening to us talk and thinking about this more deeply, I mean, I really feel like if the national inventory dropped 3% overnight, do we get a whole bunch of sales? I don't think so at all. I think this is interest rate paralysis, and Powell has set us up for this. We talked about this before he spoke, that whatever he does with rates, lowering them, if he says he's going to do it several more times in the near future, why in the hell would anybody do anything until that happens, right? And so I think we are just in interest rate paralysis. This is not, boy, if I get the right price, I'm going to jump in. I don't think that's the analysis right now of the average buyer in the marketplace.
You would have to see pricing drop by more than that 3%. I mean, if you had home pricing come down 10 or 15% or a meaningful amount, it starts to impact the affordability equation. But I think you're right. Incremental, very minor changes, improvements in pricing, kind of what we've seen in a number of these charts from the very peak price down to today's price. You're a few percent, but it's not drastic. I think that's exactly right. You are probably, Mark, the only one that listens to us talk and thinks at a deeper level. I'm afraid that I don't know how much intelligence we bring to the conversation, though it isn't fun to do, but it struck me the way you set that up.
Well, so Jeff, do you think it is going to take material price decreases to revive activity in the housing market?
I think it's more likely the interest rate paralysis that you're talking about. I do think, however, that if the Fed sees other economic data that say, hey, the job market's stronger than we thought it was, we're not going to move, materially, and if mortgage rates stay north of 6 for a prolonged period of time, to me, that feels like the only thing that can give in a longer term analysis. But my expectation is that it's going to be a shorter term adjustment as interest rates move from 6.5 down into the 5s or something like that, maybe into the 4s. If it did that, that's what fixes and brings people off the sideline much quicker, and I think in a much more dramatic way than home pricing. If that doesn't happen on the interest rate side, that seems to be the only thing that's left to give on affordability, but that seems to be a slower adaptation in the market than the expectation of interest rates changing in a shorter time period.
Well, with these recent strong economic numbers, both jobs and GDP, we may not get a whole bunch of interest rate rises or drops to get down to what you're talking about. And it'll be interesting to watch. I think the non-data driven possibility is just this human psychological experiment that we have going on in this darn election that we finally get, hopefully. Well, I guess that's a big assumption, but the closure that we get in early November when the polls close, that we know who is going to be president. I think that probably means a lot to the average buyer out there. There's been such uncertainty on so many levels in this election. And by the way, we really hope to have one of our next episodes here pretty soon talking about housing and what that looks like under the different administrations, whoever would win, both House, all House, Senate, and presidential seats. So hope to get into that. I think that will be an interesting discussion.
Boy, absolutely. And the policies matter. It'll be fun to see what the impact is. Look forward to that analysis for sure.
Yeah, well, Jeff, just wrapping up, this certainly speaks to the affordability problem. I think this is from Visual Capitalist, great website if you haven't seen it. They really communicate well. I try and learn from them. But this only goes up through 2022. But you can see the yellow, which is the space between the national median sale price and the median household income at the bottom here. It was larger in 2022 than it is now. I think it's probably shrunk a bit. You and I were talking preparing for the show that maybe we'd be at 5.5 or 5.2 or something like that here in 2024 as we sort of extrapolate forward. But I think this is a little contrary to what I've been saying here, which is I'm not sure affordability is what is fully driving the stillness we're seeing in the marketplace.
Yeah, and to that point, Mark, they do have a little note on here that says even though there was a smaller gap between the median household income, which was household income in this case and not personal income, And the median home price, like back in 1985, I think is where this starts. They were just made a note, that because of the high interest rate environment in the 80s at that time, that was still eating up nearly half of the total available household income in mortgage payments. So it almost forced that gap to be lower than it is today. A 12 or 14% interest rate on a mortgage, is going to materially impact your payment, even compared to a 6.5% interest rate, that we're staring down today. And so I think that difference or that spread between current household income, on a median basis and home pricing has probably converged slightly. It's quite a bit more than it was, and that was part of this thought, exercise that I had, and where my mind went when I was talking with these people in that home, reminiscing of buying right back in this mid 1980 time period. But there's more than just the median home price, as you think about and consider the median income and what interest rates were doing then and what they're doing now. It starts to make a little more sense as far as why home pricing has gone up so much more than the median income. But something it does feel like has to give one way or the other. I think it'll be interest rates. I hope it will, because that relieves the pain a little bit sooner than waiting for the home price market to correct.
Well, Jeff, I can't leave this topic without covering a sort of an ancillary bullet point, and in sort of the loaded statement of this human psychological experiment that U.S. monetary policy has led us down over the last 20, 30 years. I'm sure you could go longer than that, but very wild economic policy, printing money and buying mortgage-backed securities and bailing out banks and all of these things that have happened here. The wild ninja loans of the 2005s and that sort of stuff. But in 2015, you'll see a paragraph. I'm sorry, it's probably a little small for the viewer to read, but I'll read it to you. Is low interest rates. This 2015 low interest rates. Millennials entering home buying age and supply shortage have driven housing prices through the roof. And so I think this is a really important point, and part of what's adding to the rise of prices. And I believe we have had a material inventory problem nationally that really spurred from a paralysis in the lending community from 2008 and the great financial crisis, the GFC. And we lived it as residential appraisers. Banks could not get loans to develop land to sell to builders to build houses. And it was a 3 or 4 year process of stillness where banks were just not in a position to do it. And so we were already short supplied and went through a long period of not adding inventory to the supply of US housing. And that really did not catch up. There was very little that was catching us up. And then we get hit with COVID, and we get hit with the next generation reaching home buying age. And we have had a boatload of inventory added to the marketplace now over the last 2 or 3 years with the major home builders. A lot of it is sitting for sale empty right now in complete construction. And so we'll see what happens with that. But part of this home affordability and the rise in median home price is that there's a lot of freaking buyers out there. I mean, it's hard for us appraisers to remember 2018 and 19, but the problem of the time was, if you don't have cash, you can't compete with the corporate investors that are coming in and buying the homes. And if you're a first-time buyer, good luck. The few homes out there, you're just not competitive. And so there were a lot of businesses that popped up, trying to help the consumer. Maybe they would buy the house as an intermediary and then sell it to a first-time home buyer. All sorts of things out there to try and address that demand.
Yeah, you make such a good point, Mark, about just the psychology that goes into the market dynamics. And as you were talking, I remember, we had a bunch of subdivisions around here that got developed, during this the peak, right before this great financial crisis. And to your point, there literally were banks that were sitting on like the lots were built or were installed, but there were no homes on them, and they couldn't give the lots away. Literally, I mean, they had projected lot pricing of whatever it was, $150,000, $200,000 for a finished lot, and they ended up just dumping them for $40,000 or $50,000 a lot, when it was all said and done. And so their banking regulator said, hey, you're not making any more land loans or development loans, like ever, it felt like. And I appraised subdivisions that were sitting there in this distress, and well, the new price point of asking prices for lots at which they're not selling is now a new low, and you chase that down, and that really did, I think, contribute a lot to what you're talking about of this lack of inventory. Once the market had gotten to a little bit more healthy space, it was still just hard to bring that inventory online, and there's this psychological aspect to it that the market's great, so I'm okay to pay a higher price than the neighbor paid down the street. Well, when that turns, and we saw that in those V-shaped charts of the bubble number one, when there's this psychology out there that, man, the market's terrible and values are going down, that becomes self-fulfilling as well. And we're not at that point yet. I think we could, if the market turned and started dropping, maybe that psychology kicks in. I haven't seen that to this point. I'm not certain that that's what's going to play out. I think the interest rate reduction could give us, a little bit of a real estate soft landing, kind of like the Fed's trying to accomplish with the U.S. economy. But it remains to be seen. But I think you just made a compelling point that I've lived and seen, firsthand of the impact that the psychology has in what market participants do. And it's like this pendulum swings, but it overcorrects in both directions, due primarily to that psychological aspect of markets.
You bet. Well, Jeff, we'll close out the discussion. I think here, this is home price affordability in the U.S. over 3 decades, I guess it is, roughly. And I think the blue line is well, and I think the blue line is median household income and affordability based on median household income. And we are not that far off from the early 2000s. Affordability was getting problematic then, and so we're above that right now. I think this is through 2023. It certainly has come a little further back to regress to the mean here. So it is difficult to afford right now homes, no doubt about it. I think this grid kind of shows that for us. But in my mind, it's not as bad as you think it would be. Based on looking at a couple years ago and what we are today, that makes you think that it is devastating. And I'm not sure it's that devastating in the short.
That's what surprised me. This red line, is up significantly, which is the median home price, but the affordability, for the reasons we just laid out on those prior slides, it's still a problem, but it's not as dramatic as I was expecting to find, as we dove into the data, which was kind of the interesting takeaway for me.
You bet. Well, Jeff, fun for us, maybe not for everybody else. They're likely fell asleep 20 minutes ago, but glad we could usher you into a good night of sleep. I have actually gotten a lot of feedback from folks saying, "Oh, I like to listen to podcasts when I go to sleep. I'll give it a listen." So glad to be here with you in that time. But really good. Enjoyed it, and look forward to talking about some of these hot topics in the next episode.
Absolutely, we'll do it. Appreciate it, Mark.
All right, take care.